Picture discovering something the world has never witnessed, only for it to vanish forever, never to appear again. Creatures so uncommon and so enigmatic that we only know they exist because someone somewhere captured a single glimpse, from glowing sharks with pockets to red leopard cats. Today, we're exploring 5 of the rarest, most mysterious animals that were spotted only once. Starting with the American pocket shark, a shark with pockets. This tiny shark, barely 5.5 inches long, was found in the Gulf of Mexico during a 2010 research expedition that was actually focused on studying sperm whales. It wasn't until 3 years later that scientists at NOAA took a closer look and realized they had discovered a tiny shark species completely unknown to science. And here's the wildest part. This was only the second pocket shark ever found. The first one, known as the pocket shark, was caught way back in 1979, thousands of miles off the coast of Chile. For decades, scientists thought it was the only one of its kind. Then suddenly, the American pocket shark shows up in the Gulf of Mexico. That's just insane. Now, this little guy isn't your typical shark. The American pocket shark has a round, bulbous, almost whale-like head. A light gray body and darker fins around its skin are tiny clusters of photophores, basically little light-producing organs, which it probably uses to camouflage itself in the deep sea. But the real mystery, and arguably the coolest thing about this shark, are those 2 strange pockets behind its front fins. They're actually tiny little glands, which scientists think are capable of secreting a glowing fluid that could help attract prey or communicate with other sharks. How insane is that? It's like a little shark spraying its own neon-colored perfume at a rave to try and attract mates. No one knows for sure what this pocket is used for, as we've only ever seen one. And that's the thing. That single specimen, a juvenile immature male weighing just half an ounce, that was caught in a deep-sea research net over 980 feet below the surface. And since then, there's been no record since. It's been over a decade, and despite countless surveys and trawls, no one's ever seen another American pocket shark. Does that mean it's gone? Probably not extinct, but it does show how insanely little we know about the deep sea, and just the ocean in general. These sharks live in the Bath apelagic zone in literal pitch-black waters thousands of feet down, and humans almost never explore there. They're so small, so elusive that even if they're abundant in the deep sea, we'd never really know it. If we're ever going to find another pocket shark, it'll probably once again be by accident. But until then, the American pocket shark remains one of the most mysterious creatures ever caught. A shark with a built-in pocket, seen once and never again. Now, this next animal is actually a real mystery, and it just so happens to be one of the rarest cats in the world. This is the Galleris cat, also called by some the Nariño cat or red tigrina. Sadly, like many of the other species, we don't even know for sure if this animal still exists. All we have is one single skin that was collected way back in 1989 on the Galleris volcano. High in the Andes of southern Colombia, over 10,000 feet above sea level, the skin shows a small spotted cat part of the Leopardus family. But unlike other tigrinas, its fur is a striking reddish orange with black rosettes that are deeper red on the inside. The cat's total body length is around 1.5 feet long with an almost 1 foot long tail. What's nuts to think is that all of this detail that we have now comes from a single skin, a literal clue. Now, the skin sat in a Colombian institute for decades, initially mistaken for an ordinary tigrina until a scientist in 2001 spotted some kind of anomaly and then spent the next 2 decades studying it. Genetic analysis later showed that its DNA doesn't match any other known cat species, and both nuclear and mitochondrial sequences were found to be unique. Can you believe that? A completely distinct lineage, divergent from other leopard species 1.2 to 1.9 million years ago, that was quite literally hiding in plain sight all this time. Since that collection, no other individuals have been found. Trail cams have been placed all across southern Colombia since 2018 that haven't picked it up, and surveys till now have turned up nothing. Its high-altitude habitat is extremely fragmented and under pressure from human activity. So, if the Galleris cat still exists, it's probably in tiny numbers. It could already be extinct, or maybe it's just super elusive, seemingly purposefully staying hidden. So, what would it take to see one again? Scientists would need to confirm a living population. In order to do that, they need to locate additional skins or skulls from local hunters. Ideally, capture some kind of genetic material to understand its relationship to other tigrinas. Until then, Galleris cat remains a species of cat that we only know from a single pelt that was found all those years ago. Next up, a bright orange gliding squirrel that's only ever been seen once, the Dafa flying squirrel. This is one of the rarest mammals on Earth, found deep in the jungles of northern India. This animal is honestly so incredibly beautiful. It's got this crazy reddish grizzled fur and this white belly, and its patagium, the thin membrane that stretches between its limbs and lets it glide through the trees, is orange. And here's one of the craziest things about the squirrel. From head to tail, this squirrel is 3.5 feet. That is a pretty damn big squirrel. And if you imagine that thing soaring silently over the canopy at night, it's insane, but not as insane as the story of its discovery, which was just fascinating. Back in 1981, a zoologist named Chayamrup Biswas and his team were surveying wildlife in Navassa National Park, which is a massive misty rainforest tucked between India and Myanmar, a place I'd really love to visit one day. And that's when they stumbled across a single specimen of a flying squirrel unlike anything they'd ever seen. Lo and behold, it turned out to be an entirely new species. And since that one sighting, which is now almost 44 years ago, not a single confirmed sighting has ever been made again. Can you believe that? One of the largest flying squirrels in the world, something you'd think would easily be seen if it was up in the treetops, seen once and seemingly never again. Now, something really cool is that a few possible relatives have popped up over the years. In 2013, researchers found a similar species in Laos, the Laotian giant flying squirrel. And in 2018, another was described in China called the Mount Gaoligong flying squirrel. All three of these have been tested and found to be in the same ultra-rare genus as our Navassa flying squirrel, making them some of the most mysterious rodents in the entire world. As for why we haven't seen the Navassa flying squirrel again? Well, that's the saddest part. The national park that it belongs to is remote, yes, but it's not exactly untouched. There's hunting, there's poaching for bushmeat, ongoing habitat loss from logging, there's habitat encroachment. The forest where that first squirrel was found could easily have been changed since then. But some scientists think that the species might survive in small numbers, hidden away in the park's steep valleys and high ironwood forest. But without proof or any DNA evidence, it's been listed as critically endangered by the IUCN and possibly extinct. However, get this. In 2022, there was a glimmer of hope, a possible sighting in the exact same region. Researchers even collected potential fecal samples that they think belong to said squirrel to test for DNA. And if the poop sample turns out to be real and gives us a positive ID for this squirrel, then it could be one of the biggest rediscoveries of our time. But until then, the Navassa flying squirrel remains a literal ghost of the treetops. Next up, a bird that feels like it literally slipped straight into legend. Meet the Seaos Scops owl. This species is a tiny, elusive owl known only from a single specimen collected back in 1866. That's over a century and a half ago. And since then, there's been literally nothing. Not even any photos, sightings, no calls that can be verified. The only semi-conclusive thing that there's been is stories by locals from one small volcanic island in Indonesia, and one old preserved bird sitting in a museum drawer. The initial story behind this owl discovery starts on Seaos Island, which is north of Sulawesi, a remote place that was covered in forest back in the day. Sadly, today most of it is gone, which doesn't look too promising for our little owl. The Seaos Scops owl was first described from that one holotype that was collected during the 19th century, and nobody's ever managed to find another. It's believed to have lived in the island's lowland rainforest, flying between branches in the dense, humid canopy. Given its relatives like the Sulawesi and the Seaos Scops owl, it was probably a nocturnal forest hunter that fed on insects and small invertebrates and blending perfectly into the bark of trees. However, here's where things get interesting. Some scientists aren't even totally sure what our owl is to begin with. The taxonomy of this owl has been debated for years. Some researchers think it's its own distinct species, while others believe it could just be a subspecies of another Indonesian Scops owl. But the problem when you're debating something like that, there's literally only one specimen to go off of. You can't exactly run genetic tests or compare behaviors when the only thing you've got is a 150-year-old bird in a museum. All that DNA is extremely fragmented and degraded, and there's not really any help a sample that old can provide. Despite that, there have been rumors. In 2017, a video popped up online of a small owl that was caught inside a building in Seaos. Locals swore it matched the description of the Seaos Scops owl, and the footage sparked a huge wave of excitement among ornithologists and birders. Could this have been it? The first living evidence of the Seaos Scops owl in over a century? Unfortunately, we don't really know. Even after all the analysis with tons of scientists looking at said video footage, no one could really confirm it, and it still remains unverified. And since then, teams have gone back to Seaos, hiking through the last scraps of forest, setting up nocturnal listening stations, recording calls through the night, putting up cameras. But unfortunately, they didn't get anything. The biggest reason that we haven't seen it again is that the forests of Seaos are almost gone. Back in the late 1990s, researchers estimated that only about 50 hectares of forest remained on the island, most of it clinging to the steep slopes of Mount Awu, which also happens to be an active volcano. The rest of the island had been cleared for farming, logging, and plantations. For a species that probably depends on dense forest cover, that's quite literally a death sentence. Still, conservationists aren't giving up. Various organizations have been funding surveys on Seaos and nearby islands, hoping to find just one to prove it's still out there. Because if it is, the population would almost certainly be tiny, maybe as few as a dozen birds at most. But even that would be enough to give the ghost species a second chance. Until that day, though, the Seaos Scops owl remains one of the great mysteries of the bird world. A tiny forest owl that vanished, seen once in 1866, and never again. Now, this next species is the OG ghost lizard, and there are a few ghost lizards out there. Lizards that have been seen once, and then never again, or not seen for many years. But the species I'm talking about is the Navassa curly-tailed lizard. This species was discovered back in 1868, and like the other four animals we've previously talked about, we only know it existed because of one single specimen, and that's it. The whole description of the species is based on that single preserved female that someone collected on Navassa Island, a tiny uninhabited dot in the Caribbean. It had this dark gray body with faint bands running across its back, and a tail that faded from pale at the base to deep gray near the end. That seems pretty unassuming and quite ordinary for a lizard. But what made it special was the same thing that gives the whole group its name, that little cute curly tail. You might have seen them in Florida, but curly-tailed lizards have a weird behavior where they perform this curled tail lift, and they do this regardless of whether or not a predator is around, almost like they're showing off. Here's the crazy thing though, that one specimen was all scientists had for over 50 years until another one supposedly turned up in 1917, collected by a guy named Rollo Beck. However, decades later, when another herpetologist took a closer look, he went, "Yeah, that's not it." Turns out that the lizard Rollo collected only just turned out to be a completely different species altogether. So, in the end, we're back to square one. That single lizard collected 157 years ago. Guys, this is just a small handful of examples of unbelievable creatures that may still be out there that are known from a single specimen ever. There are many more out there, and I'd love to do more breakdowns. So if you like these kind of lists, like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll do some more. See you on the next one.